It was a deadly and violent night in Montreal North, and today many residents fear their streets have been taken over by a gang war.
A 15-year-old girl killed in a drive-by shooting, just one in a recent rash of gun murders in Montreal.
It happened in the heart of where the Bloods gang is known to control the streets. What happened may have been the result of internal fighting.
Future gang très lourd.
Profit boys in that building, I'm saying. RDP. You know what I'm saying? Riverside, RDP, Rivière des Prairies.
Welcome back to Hut TV 416. So we have a crazy story coming out of Montreal. While the rest of Quebec was under curfew and lockdown, some of Montreal's biggest street gangs have been locked in their own bloody gang war. We're talking 40+ shootings since last September, police being shot at on multiple occasions, and even young girls being caught in the crossfire. Montreal police have responded with increased patrols and a new anti-gun trafficking squad. But none of this has worked, and with lockdown measures now loosening up in Quebec, the violence is beginning to escalate. As people are beginning to move around more freely, Montreal police say that warring gangs are now increasingly bumping into each other in public places, resulting in fears of more violence. And these fears are well-founded. On the first weekend after Quebec lifted the curfew, on May 28th, Montreal police reported over a dozen violent incidents across the city. We're talking multiple public shootouts, stabbings, and even murders, all within the span of 48 hours after the curfew was lifted. Montreal police say they linked most of these violent incidents to criminal organizations. Police specifically linked a wild shootout in downtown Montreal to two warring street gangs and longtime enemies, known as the Profit Boys in Zone 43.
Et ça serait entre les Profit Boys, ça c'est un groupe criminalisé de Rivière-des-Prairies, et les 43, ça c'est un gang de rue de Montréal-Nord.
If you ask the Profit Boys, they'll more than likely tell you they're just rappers who are trying to make it out of Montreal.
Like, I mean, we from Canada, so I want them to know like there's some real street niggas like doing it. So it's really why I started like rapping that.
But Montreal police claim that the Profit Boys, whose music talks about making fast money, trapping, and hood life, are instead a criminal organization, and that their lyrics actually reflect reality. Well-known rappers from the Profit Boys include Ryder, Ali Baba, and Jack Boy.
First things first, fuck my ops. Niggas get popped, niggas get dropped. You fuck with them, can't fuck with me. You fuck with them.
I was Bible 40 thieves. If you count it right, that's 41 guns to squeeze. Yeah, yeah. My young niggas flipping quarter keys. Still screaming fuck 40 thieves.
Des négos disent qu'ils fouettent. Glock 19 Red Beam. J'ai garanti qu'ils pètent.
Then you have Zone 43, or 43. Zone 43 are Bloods based out of the borough of Montreal North, and have been beefing with the Profit Boys, who also claim blood, for years. Zone 43 takes its name from the 43 bus line that runs through their neighborhood, which is located in the infamous borough of Montreal North. Zone 43 also has a lot of rappers, including No Game, who was shot and killed years ago, and, more recent, I See the Zo, Bloodshot and White Ghost.
I told ya, motherfucker, you fucking with a real nigga. I've been through it, done it. You got beef, it's on the grill, nigga.
Fuck a bitch, them niggas know we in this shit. Free the gang, fuck a snitch, that nigga know we let it rip.
Je connais beaucoup qui pissent quand ils entendent des sirènes. Avec moi sur la piste, impossible qu'il y a pas d'ailleurs. It's vote to the train, you to the N to the G, you are hot, you get killed, that's all.
The Profit Boys and Zone 43 have been warring with each other for almost a decade. Both street gangs come from the infamous north side of Montreal Island. The Profit Boys claim the borough of Rivière des Prairies, aka RGP, or Greenland, and Zone 43 claims the borough of Montreal Nord. And they don't play in the north side of Montreal. The older gangs from the area, such as the Bogars and Unit 44, were a major force in the Montreal gang scene. They waged a bloody war against the much larger Montreal Crip gangs, actively defended their drug turf against the Hells Angels, and even did hits for the Montreal mob. As a result, most of the Bogars in Unit 44 are now either dead or in jail, and the newer generation of Montreal street gangs like the Profit Boys and Zone 43 have emerged to take their place. But, originally, the Profit Boys and Zone 43 weren't even enemies. For the most part, the gangs in the north side of Montreal, who all claim blood, used to be allies. But internal politics eventually caused Zone 43 to fall out with everyone else, and, as a result, Zone 43 and the Profit Boys have now been beefing with each other for almost a decade. According to the newspapers, Zone 43 allegedly fell out with both the Profit Boys and the older gangs from the north side of Montreal after an influential Zone 43 member was killed in the early 2010s. Who that influential Zone 43 member was is unknown. But whoever he was, Zone 43 must have really loved him, because they committed one of the most vicious acts of revenge I've ever heard of. The story goes as follows. RDP is home to a provincial jail. In case you didn't know, provincial jails can be some of the worst places to be locked up in. The RDP jail is no different, and it's had its fair share of incidents, including an inmate being murdered as recently as last week. But in 2013, shortly after the Zone 43 member had been killed, a Bulgars and MFGOG named John Romel Victor, aka Axel, or Caesar, found himself in the RDP jail. He had been arrested for assault and weapons charges, and was taken to the jail on a Saturday afternoon. According to police, Victor was placed on a range alongside several members of Zone 43. He would be dead within hours. According to police, up to 7 members of Zone 43 viciously attacked Victor shortly after his arrival. They reportedly dragged Victor to another cell, tied him up, poured boiling hot water on him, and beat him to death. Absolutely brutal. Having boiling hot water poured on you is a different type of pain, and even inmates in some of the most notorious jails in America will attack their enemies in the same way. For example, in this old jail documentary, an ex-inmate in Rikers Island describes what he saw while doing time in New York's most infamous jail.
Brother put a hot baby oil in the hot water, threw it on him, and when he grabbed his face, his skin started peeling.
This was brutal, cold-blooded revenge. But it was also a message. Zone 43 was not a bunch of young kids who were going to be pushed around by the older gangs. Zone 43 was official, and demanded respect. This series of events sparked one of Montreal's largest ongoing street gang conflicts of the past decade. We're talking dozens of tit-for-tat shootings and murders as a result, with both sides taking losses. Montreal police and local media have for the most part downplayed the conflict, and usually haven't released many details to the public about what's going on. Because it's almost impossible to talk about what exactly happened, we're going to fast forward to the beginning of 2021, when things really start to get interesting. By the time that 2021 rolled around, the Prophet Boys and Zone 43 beef had already been heating up for months. Shootings were happening on a near-weekly basis across RDP in Montreal North. In one of those shootings, an alleged Zone 43 member, nicknamed G-Baby, was shot and killed. Tributes quickly started pouring in online by Zone 43 members, including now incarcerated rapper, Bloodshot. But Zone 43's ops also had something to say. Prophet Boys rapper, Ali Baba, dropped disrespectful comments on another Zone 43 rapper's IG page, not only mocking G-Baby's death, but going at all of Zone 43. But this wasn't out of character for Ali Baba. In October 2020, he dropped what is probably one of the most disrespectful diss tracks in Montreal history. In this song, which is reminiscent of 50 Cent's famous How to Rob diss track, Ali Baba called out some of Montreal's biggest rappers, dissing each one individually, and even stopping to mention dead guys. But, as is usually the case, the public disrespect put a huge target on Ali Baba's back. And he was almost shot and killed at the end of May, when his car was sprayed with bullets in northeast Montreal. You would think almost getting killed would humble a person, but less than a week later, Ali Baba dropped another song, where he tells his ops that if they really wanted to get in, to hurry up and get the job done. The video even shows the car Ali Baba was riding in when he was shot at, and, looking at the car, it's a miracle he not only survived, but wasn't even hit.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's how it is, huh? They still think foes, bitch ass niggas.
While this was happening, Ryder was locked up in Toronto. Both Ryder and Jack Boy were in Toronto in early 2021 when Ryder was reportedly arrested on a gun charge. He was actively posting on his IG page, with locations tagged in Brampton and Scarborough. But, shortly after Ali Baba was shot at, the Prophet Boys and Zone 43 would run into each other in downtown Montreal, where they would get into a public shootout outside of an Airbnb.
And when they arrived, they found a man, a 29-year-old, with a lower body gunshot wound. He was sent to hospital and was conscious during his transport. He is considered one of the suspects involved in this case. 3 other men were also arrested, all between the ages of 25 and 36 years old. And according to police, multiple gun shell casings have been found throughout this large area, and they say that the events happened in one space and moved to another.
The person was shot and then arrested was allegedly a high-ranking member of the Prophet Boys. Also arrested was a high-ranking member of Zone 43 named Kevin Desprez. Desprez is the son of Beauvoir John, the man who founded Master B, which was one of the first Haitian street gangs in Montreal ever. Although Beauvoir John has turned his life around and is now counseling kids to stay away from gangs, he wasn't able to keep his son from turning to the streets. In 2015, Desprez was charged in connection with the shooting death of a man nicknamed Cowboy. Cowboy was reportedly affiliated with Zone 43's ops, and was also reportedly related to a now-deceased Bulgars OG nicknamed Biggie. While detained in the RDP jail awaiting trial, Desprez would also almost be beaten to death. And Desprez would also himself be shot in 2020, after someone ran up on him near La Pierre and Pascal, and shot him at least once. This is a crazy story, and things are far from over. But the next time you think that Haitian street gangs only exist in Florida, just remember that some of the wildest Haitian gangsters come out of the 514.